Injury number 3 is spondylolisthesis. What is this? It's a big, long, complicated name, but from a very simple perspective, you have vertebra, disc in the middle, vertebra on top, and then you'd have a disc vertebra on top of that. Now, at the back of the vertebra, there is a little arch, and then it goes into the spinous processes, transverse processes at the back. Now, what essentially happens is the body of the vertebra becomes disconnected, so the front becomes disconnected from the back. So the bone basically breaks and the vertebra slips forward. So that's essentially what spondylolisthesis is. It's the slipping of the vertebra. Now, it's not the breaking, that's different. It's the slipping, or it's the break with the slippage, essentially. What's causing it? So what's causing that break to happen and then the slip to happen? Well, what's causing the break to happen are excessive extension postures and sort of the repetitive nature of the extension postures. And the other one is excessive anterior shear forces. So the extension postures, so at the most extreme level, if you can think of a gymnast when they do that back bend where they've got their feet on the floor and then they arch their back all the way over and then they have their hands on the floor. That is the most extreme nature of an extension posture. Now, obviously, that type of extension repeated with decondition around the spine to the muscles and so on and so forth, that is when the spine is at biggest risk of that happening. If you have an extended posture but it's being done for weeks, months, years, then you get a very, very gradual weakening of that tissue. And then eventually it will break. And so you get lots of little micro traumas and then it hits a tipping point and then it just snaps. And then that's when you get the break. The other one is anterior shear forces. Now, anterior shear forces, so imagine this is the front of the vertebra. That is where the vertebra is being pulled forwards. Now, that can come from excessive flexion to the spine because that shuts off the muscles at the back, which create a posterior shear force. So when you maintain the neutral posture of the spine, those muscles are essentially pulling the vertebra back. When you flex, you get the anterior shear force, but without the posterior shear force to neutralize it. So what we need to be able to do is, when we're talking about rehabilitating it, is we need to essentially remove or minimize those postures. So that's the first thing, is understand the nature of the mechanism that injured it, and we can then, that can start to inform at the beginning stages of the movements, the postures, positions and loads that we need to start using. So we will probably need to start using a more neutral posture. So we will start to increase that and we will start to minimize excessive extension and flexion postures. We would then start developing the tissues around the spine. So it would be, as I mentioned, minimize flexion, minimize excessive extension, and then start building in core endurance at that neutral posture. Because what we're essentially saying is this has happened, so what do we do now? So we've got the slippage, what do we do now? So we need to start stabilizing that area. So what we need is the muscles to contract at the right time around it to be able to hold, because you've got the vertebra, the disc, the vertebra, then the disc and then another vertebra. But let's just say this one in the middle is unstable because it's not being held in place. And if it's of the lumbar spine, there are no bony structures to hold it in place. It is just the muscles. So we need QL muscle, we need abdominal muscles, so the abdominal wall, we need longissimus iliocostalis to hold that area stable. The QL will be an important part to it because not only when we get the contraction of it, we get a small degree of compression as well, which will hold the vertebra in place. If you get too much compression, again, it can push it further forward. But if we can get the right amount, so again, it's not to be excessive with these muscle contractions as well. So stability is going to be a big part of that. And stability is the ability of the muscles to contract at the right time. So stabilizing the pelvis, stabilizing the spine are going to be big parts of this rehabilitation. And by stabilizing the spine, it's about getting the muscles to time at the right time. So when you lift up a weight, you're contracting as you're about to lift, or you're pre-contracting as you lift. With more refined movements, so like walking, you've got contract, and it's sort of going through that contract, relax cycle as your feet and legs are moving. So we need that to happen at the right time. So some degree of balance training will be helpful for that, because that will tell all the muscles from the ankle, the knee, the hip, the spine to communicate and stabilize that whole system of joints. So we need to be able to not only build stability to the core, but stability down through the legs as well. Also, we need that to last a long time. So we need to build endurance into all of the muscles. So using exercises like planks, side planks, bridges, but using them in a way where we're not overly compressing. So it doesn't want to be high strength, because high strength is high compression. Endurance is sort of a moderate compression, but just done over a longer period of time. But we can also build intervals into that, like we've talked about before. We can build intervals into that to break a side plank up into 3 10-second blocks with a short break in between of say 5 or 10 seconds. That will start to build endurance in. That will also start to build a degree of stability in by by sort of releasing the compression and bringing it back on, releasing the compression and bringing it back on. So there are all these different elements that would come into it. Also, with being able to minimize the movement of the spine, we would bring in increasing hip range of movement. So stretching the hips, mobilizing the hips, using exercises to increase the range of movement, like squats, like Romanian deadlifts, to be able to enhance the movement at the hip, even as like a wide side lunge as well. That will go in part to improving the range of movement of the hip. So it allows us to move from the hip so our spine doesn't move. Because if we need to lift with poor range of movement of the hip, we're probably going to flex our spine to get there, and that's going to increase the risk of causing that problem further. So we need to start building the range of movement of the hip as well, and start building that into our rehabilitation program. So as a quick summary, what is spondylolisthesis? It's the slippage of the vertebra because of the break, or the break has happened and it's then slipped. And what's causing the break and the slippage? Excessive extension. At the extreme end, it's that gymnastics, that gymnast that I talked about. But smaller movements over a prolonged period of time, weeks, months and years, can create that problem. We've also got anterior shear forces, which is the pulling forward of a vertebra. So that can happen with spine flexion, for the simple reason that the low back muscles aren't activating effectively enough to create the posterior shear force to neutralize the anterior shear force. And that mechanism, again, over a period of time, is causing the problem. How do we then go about rehabilitating it? Well, one, understanding that excessive extension and repetitive flexion is causing the problem. So we then minimize those. We try and maximize the maintenance of the neutral spine. We then go about stabilizing the spine using an abdominal brace, using exercises to activate the muscles at the right time. Include some balance training in that to get the ankle, the knee and the hip working together and well. Then building endurance into that, using planks and side planks and bridges and bird dogs as well. Then we would think about building range of movement at the hip, so our so we are able to get greater range of movement from it, so we don't have to compensate and use our lumbar spine quite as much. So that is a quick summary of the spondylolisthesis, what's causing it, or what it is, what's causing it, and how we might start to think about rehabilitating it. Many thanks for watching this episode. If you found it useful, if you've got one of these conditions and you've maybe not been quite sure about what you need to start doing, again, use these ideas as a general rule to start thinking about, to apply to your lifestyle, so you can then start going about rehabilitating your back injury. And that goes for disc bulge, stenosis, and spondylolisthesis. So many thanks for watching. If you've liked the content, please do hit the like button below. If you've got a comment or a question, please do leave it down below. If you've learnt something new, hit the thanks button. And if you want to watch more tutorials and podcast episodes like this, please do hit the subscribe button and the bell icon below.